Welcome to this new dialogue of the International Academy of Information Studies. This academy was recently founded, looking for a new understanding on a fundamental problem in our societies, knowledge incongruity and the rise of informational disarray. Pedro Marijuán, chair of the board of IAIS, will moderate this dialogue. We have today a scientific thinker, very brilliant one of the stars of our academy, one of the fellows, together with Stuart Kaufman, Antonio Damasio, Carl Friston, George Butsaki, Carlo Rovelli, Vlad Kovedra, Lou Kaufman, etc. And we have, as I was saying, Howard Bloom. He will dissect the state of the world with author and cultural leader Daniel Pinchbeck in this fifth IAIS dialogue. And okay, we will follow 20 minutes each presentation, then we will have mutual exchanges between the presenters and 30 minutes of questions and answers. Then we can be maybe more brief. And there is a YouTube channel in the title page where you can download this video, you can watch it, and other dialogues of the Academy. And now, please, Howard, you have the virtual floor.
Okay. This is a tremendous godsend to me, this dialogue, because I go on 545 radio stations once a week, every Wednesday night, and I get to hit on one of the most important global issues of our time in 4 minutes, which means I have to take an hour's worth of, research that it's taken me 5 to 6 hours to do, not including all the time I put in during the week on global affairs, which is another God knows how many hours per week. And I have to boil it down to 4 minutes. And in this format, I don't have to boil it down to 4 minutes. So here's the big picture. And Daniel's well aware of this because Daniel has a publication of kinds that goes out on email. And he just hits these points terrifically. We're living in the most cataclysmic time of our lives. And even my life, and I'm about to be 82 years old. This is a time of a tectonic clash. The world order that has been fashioned since 1945 and the end of World War II is being viciously or ignorantly torn apart. And it's being torn apart by one person, one highly consequential person who knows nothing about history, knows nothing about how the global system works, is the most ignorant man on a national level in politics that I have ever seen in my life. And that is Donald Trump. And he is having consequences all around the world. For the last 70 years, America has been the defender of the global economic order, a more or less free trading order of the world. That has depended on tremendous trust and on the belief in certain institutions like the World Monetary Fund, the strength of the dollar, and a whole bunch of other givens that we can no longer take for granted. All of a sudden, these things are being yanked out from under us. America has had the world's global currency, the reserve currency for the world for the last 70 years. And America is able to have that global currency because in times of difficulty, you can always plant your dollars in the United States and be sure that they will be far safer here than any place else. Right now, Donald Trump is pulling the system to pieces, and you cannot be sure that your money will be safe here. The Chinese have been working for decades on making the renminbi, their currency, the standard currency of the world. And little bit by little bit by little bit, their campaign is working. Right, there's a major cataclysm going on that would be going on right now, even if it weren't for Donald Trump. It's a schism, it's a split between the autocratic powers and the democratic powers. America has always led the democratic powers. No longer, because it's very clear that Donald Trump wants to be a dictator. Donald Trump wants to be an autocrat. He's doing everything in his power to tear apart the balance of powers between the judiciary, the congressional branch, the Congress and the Senate, and the executive branch in the United States, and make it so only the executive branch counts. The other day, it was about 2 weeks ago, he almost gave himself away. He was in a room, and the governor of Maine was in the room. And the governor of Maine, he asked her if she was going to knuckle under to his demands. And she said, I will follow the laws. I will follow the laws at the state level, and I will follow the laws at the federal level. And you could see Donald Trump forming an entire sentence. And that sentence was, I am the law. And then he changed it slightly, so it wouldn't sound quite as bad. But he has believed that he is the law ever since his first term. And he managed to hire when he was getting rid of Jeff Sessions, he managed to hire a new secretary of, or head of the Justice Department. And that new head of the Justice Department got the job by sending Donald Trump a 19-page letter in which he explained that anything Donald Trump does is legal because Donald Trump is the very embodiment of the law. Remember the days of Louis XIV, when Louis XIV said, "L'État, c'est moi," the state is me? Donald Trump believes he is the state. He believes it in his bones. He may never be able to quote you Louis XIV because he's probably never heard of Louis XIV. But the fact is, he believes that he is the law, and he is the people, and he is the Constitution. The problem for all of this is, first of all, Donald Trump has no interest in being the leader of the free world. He's grown up as a bully, apparently since he was a child, and he relates to other bullies. And it's been apparent ever since 1988. In 1988, Donald Trump and his wife, Ivana, a wife who came from what the Russians call the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, were flown on an all-expense-paid trip to Moscow. And it was already apparent that Donald Trump was a Slavophile through his mere choice of a wife. And remember, out of the 3 wives he's had, 2 have been women from the Ruski Mir, the Russian sphere of influence. He gobbled it up. In roughly 2013, he had bought the Miss Universe pageant. And where did he decide to throw one of his first Miss Universe pageants? Moscow. And what did he do during his entire time in Moscow? He tried to get the attention of Vladimir Putin. And how did he try to do it? By proposing the tallest building in Moscow, the Trump Tower, and by offering the top 4 floors for free to Vladimir Putin. He was not able to get the attention of Vladimir Putin, but he tried. It is apparent that Donald Trump sees Vladimir Putin as the head of the biggest club of 6th grade bullies in our lifetime. And he will do anything. He even makes himself, in Vladimir Putin's physical presence, he tries to make himself look as small as a puppy, as small as a little poodle. And he cozies up to Vladimir Putin in every way he can. So if Vladimir Putin, in his mind, is the head of the dominant group of bullies in the world today, Donald Trump is willing to abase himself in any way in order to get into the presence of that bully who he regards as superior to himself, even though Vladimir Putin's about 5'5" and Donald Trump used to be 6'4". We shrink with age. One way or the other, this means that Donald Trump has no interest in democracy. He has no interest in leading the team of democratic nations. He doesn't understand democracy. He doesn't want a democracy in the United States. He wants to be a dictator autocrat, just like Vladimir Putin, just like another one of his friends, Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. And that's the club that he is most comfortable with. So what do we see in the current so-called peace proposal from Donald Trump for the Ukraine war? It gives Vladimir Putin everything he wanted. It's as if Donald Trump had been hired by Russia and by China to take apart the United States without the use of weapons, without the loss on a battlefield of a single human life, so that China could move into the number one position, which it's been jockeying for at least since Xi Jinping took over in 2012, but before then. And so that Russia can be the faithful companion of China. And this gang of bullies, the autocratic nations, is in the process of changing the way that the world looks at itself and the way that the world behaves. Plus, it is taking us to the brink. It is taking us to the edge of starting the dominoes falling that will someday lead to World War III. There's a general principle, sometimes it's called the Thucydides effect, where there's a major change in balance of powers, and there is a rising nation that it's on its way to number one. That is the time when Third World Wars begin, because the rising nation doesn't feel it's being treated with sufficient dignity and respect, and goes to war to get itself that dignity and respect. That's the position of China, even though China's economy is only a fraction of the United States economy still. So we are in a position that could bring a third world war. We were in a position that could see the decline of democracy in a very, very, very big way. And we are on the brink of seeing the United States become something it has never, ever been before, a dictatorship, an autocracy. And that is the state of the world today, as I see it. And I'll be curious to see how Daniel sees it.
Okay. My turn? Is that the idea?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, so that was I was happy to hear that was less than 20 minutes. So 20 minutes is not a ironclad situation. We can go 15 or 12 or whatever. Yeah, no, I mean, Howard, I sympathize with a lot of what you said. You know, I do think that, yeah, on the one hand, there's the person of Donald Trump who seems to be like a sort of summarizes so much that is problematic in American history, in the American psyche, in the American character. And then there's also Trump as a kind of our version, you know, of something that we've seen all around the world right now. So that's beyond him being a, you know, despicable character. You know, there are obviously forces, you know, throughout the world that lead to this type of autocratic crisis. You know, people are comparing Trump to Bolsonaro, to the Italian guy from the 80s or 90s, whatever his name was, to, as you said, Erdogan. You know, so all over the world, we're seeing kind of like democracy, liberal democracy struggling with autocracies. And yeah, I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I mean, you know, I thought that, you know, Biden was doing many decent things. I thought the Inflation Reduction Act was obviously a crucial thing. But somehow the poor and particularly the working class in the U.S., particularly in the South, you know, did not feel that their, you know, deeper needs were being addressed. And yeah, there has been kind of a logjam in the Democratic Party for decades where, you know, things like, you know, minimum wage not getting raised, you know, so, you know, people feeling that they could barely scrape by, getting harder and harder for people to live, even as, you know, there's more and more oligarchic wealth, you know, so people see these people have tremendous wealth sort of taking off from the rest of society, and their kind of their own horizon of what their future, you know, looks like is getting smaller and smaller. So I think, you know, that was part of, I mean, you know, I do kind of agree with some of the kind of analyses that blame the liberal and progressive movement for not responding intelligently or creatively enough to oligarchic control and to other factors that were in play. And then, of course, then the other issue that, I'd imagine for Howard, that's an interesting one to consider is the role that, the tech oligarchs and technology have been playing in this shift from, democracy to tyranny. And then really the only question I think that we really have at this point is, where do we go from here? Can we go back? Do we have to go somewhere else? I mean, do we see the constitutional republic that we know in America restored in its old form? Or are we really seeing, no matter what, a kind of like transition to a different system? And then really the question is, where is that ending up? Is it going to be a, Putin-like autocracy, or is there another form of participatory democracy, with an ecological understanding that could emerge in this sort of interregnum, and then I think we need to think about, like what happened with these tech, because a lot of these tech guys, I mean, not Peter Thiel, who was actually a right-wing ideologue when he was in college in Stanford. He was actually much more involved with right-wing politics than with tech. He just tried a few things. He worked I think he was a clerk for Supreme Court. He realized that law was like too boring and too slow for his ambitions. So he saw, this whole, the development of this tech world in Silicon Valley, and he was able to scrape together $1 million from family and friends, because he was already kind of embedded in this like right-wing thought culture. He'd written a book with David Sachs against multiculturalism, as they then called it. Now it's DEI. And he was in the right place at the right time. He was smart. They built the PayPal. They had the PayPal mafia that included Musk and David Sachs and a number of these other people. Then Thiel was in the right place to invest early on in Facebook. He was he was very cunning, and that he put a bunch of his money into a Roth IRA, all of his Facebook stock, which I think in 2 years, when he's 60, that's going to be valued at like $4 billion. He's going to get tax-free, which, maybe, I mean, I would say from my perspective, Thiel is the closest thing to an architect of this current situation that we're in. Thiel groomed J.D. Vance, the vice president, and Vance was an atheist when Thiel met him. Thiel convinced him to become a Catholic. And, as my understanding is, there's some connection to this movement Opus Dei, which also a lot of the Heritage Foundation people are part of, like Kevin Roberts and so on, which is a very secretive, very conservative element in the Catholic world. And Opus Dei was actually involved in many other dictatorial efforts around the world. For instance, they organized the economy of Franco's Spain. And they were also involved with Pinochet in Chile and so on. So we're seeing like an old model, an old playbook being applied to a much bigger and more wealthy country, but a country with a lot of deep problems that have not been addressed over the last century, including racism, including misogyny, and including ever-growing oligarchy. So our inability to get those things under control, I think, was the preconditions for this catastrophic thing that we're now facing. So I guess that's one have been my focuses lately, is understanding how the sort of tech world, because I know some of these people, I used to go to Burning Man, every year. I met many people in this sort of tech world, how a lot of these people who have not only amassed huge amounts of wealth, who were, many of them, not Thiel, were supporting Obama, and even Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and even Biden. They all made the swivel over to Trump. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, one is these sort of percolating ideologies. There's a book called The Sovereign Individual, which is a sort of libertarian manifesto that came out in 1997, that Thiel wrote the introduction when they reissued it. And also Mark Andreessen claims it's his favorite book, and so on. The Sovereign Individual basically argued that as a result of network technology and information age data processing, eventually the nation state, or very soon, was going to become an out-of-date form, and we would have a shift from kind of federal governments, kind of sovereign national currencies, to what they talked about as commercialized sovereignty. So instead, you'd have private corporations creating these kind of like city-state fiefdoms. And this idea has been further elaborated by younger people who are part of this quite substantive philosophical and ideological movement that's kind of done its own thing kind of outside of the establishment, which includes Balaji Srinivasan, who wrote a book called The Network State, who is basically this one, I would say, an out-and-out fascist, as most of these people are. He talks about a future where you have kind of areas of cities like San Francisco that are under the control of what he calls the gray tribe, which is the sort of tech libertarian tribe, where they welcome the red tribe, which are traditional Republicans and MAGA people, yet they make it impossible. If you're part of the blue tribe, you're not allowed to enter into this area of the city that they control, or it could be a whole city. So, and that kind of, exile, physical exile, is the beginning of a road that leads to, ostracism, camps, and ultimately genocides. And I think that we have to take very, very seriously that within this right-wing reactionary movement, there's a lot of things to be very, very concerned about. Like, I don't think we're only just seeing this thing getting going now. I mean, I got very alarmed, months before the election when I read a book by Jack Posobiec, who wrote a book called Unhumans. And he's a young man who is a Christian nationalist right-winger. He went with J.D. Vance and those guys to Munich when they met with NATO, when Vance spoke, I think, at the AI conference. And Posobiec's book Unhumans, which you can get online, basically says that leftists and socialists and even liberals and even Democrats are not actually human. They're not fully human, and they don't have to be treated fully like humans. And then the book talks about kind of Pinochet, who used to, mentions the helicopter killings in Chile, where Pinochet would bring up dissidents and people, journalists, and throw them out of these helicopters to kill them. And it approves of this as the kind of thing that needs to happen in the U.S., that Franco and Pinochet are the right model for the U.S. That's already pretty bad, but including the J.D. Vance actually blurbs this book. And he says, this is the right plan for America. This is what we should do, So I think we really do have to understand that this is like, we're like in a very extreme situation. I mean, it's not an accident that Musk and Bannon have made these Nazi salutes. It's not accidental that if you look at the Doge logo, it includes Nazi symbolism and a reference to the kind of 14-word white nationalist slogan. They're completely dog whistling that this is what they see for our future. Okay, and they're cynically using anti-Semitism. Obviously, if you're a Nazi and a white nationalist and a Christian white nationalist, you're not actually a huge fan of the Jews. But for the time being, Israel is a useful kind of tool for them because Israel is showing a model for a religious ethno-state that is able to completely dominate, exploit, and murder at will its minority populations. So that seems to be what they want to do here, and that's why they've one of the reasons why they've made this whole thing about anti-Semitism. It's a very cynical and very perverse move, as most of their moves are. So I guess what I'm seeing, and I could go on in any direction with this, but unfortunately, in terms of the liberal democratic approach to this, now that people are beginning to get it, they're beginning to understand the roots of this. So, for instance, Elon Musk's grandfather was part of a sort of proto-fascist movement called Technocracy Inc. and back in the 40s, and they actually moved to Canada because they liked apartheid and they wanted to be part of a movement like that. But his grandfather was actually in prison for a while in Canada because he was part of this proto-fascist movement. And this movement saw a future where there would be no democratic participation, no elections. There would be a scientist, engineer, dictator, and there would be basically three major technates in the world. There would be the American technate, which included Canada and Greenland and stretched down to like Mexico and Panama. And you can see maps of all of this exactly from the 40s. There would be an Asian technate, which would be, I guess, China, Japan, Thailand, etc. And there would be a Eurasian technate, which would be Russia all the way down through Morocco. I don't think they even talked about Africa in this thing. Africa for them was just like, I guess, to grab the resources. And so, when Musk and Trump teamed up to, with this election, Trump since then has been saying, oh, we're going to invade Mexico, we're going to take over the Panama Canal, we're going to invade Greenland, we're going to take over Canada. And I think we should take it, that also quite seriously, that's part of the plan. And with the tariffs, these are exactly the same thing that Hitler instituted in the 30s in Germany. They have the effect of, as an attempt to create what they call autarky, a completely, independent state, which of course is basically impossible at this point, considering the networks of global trade. So that actually, created a lot of misery. It immiserated the middle class. I mean, the purpose of a lot of Trump's, and you could say that he's just chaotic or stupid, but actually I think that, as Howard mentioned, he's working in some ways with sort of transnational oligarchs, the sort of global mafia that includes Putin, that includes the Saudi wealth fund and so on. So basically the idea is to kind of ruin the American middle class. So they're forced into just a fight for pure survival. And that allows to sort of pyramidize power and pull more and more centralization to the top of the pyramid. Now, if you look at the sovereign individual as a model, they also are okay with the U.S. defaulting on its debt. Because then if you're a transnational oligarch, you can buy the resources, the public parks, the bankrupt companies or whatever, for pennies on a dollar. So as Thiel gets his $4 billion in 2 years, he'll be in a great position to buy up these distressed assets. So it allows you to, create control. Now, the other thing we're seeing with Doge is, we now understand that the purpose of Doge was to assimilate all of the data, private data of everybody in the U.S., labor data from National Labor Relations Board, health data, tax data, into one operating system, which it seems very likely they've already transferred a lot of that information to Russia, according to different whistleblower testimonies, like one from the National Labor Relations Board. And then the idea is how you can use that in any way you want to further your power and your control over the population. So for instance, maybe it's not expedient to put everybody in jail, but you can, start IRS proceedings against them, or you can hassle them or kick their kids out of school, or who knows what. It just gives them, like sort of a much. So this is what we're facing right now. And really, unfortunately, this should never have happened. Trump should never have been allowed to run again. I mean, he orchestrated a coup against the federal government for whatever reasons. And I think we have to look that there were deeper structural complicity that allowed us to be in this situation. There obviously was some significant faction within the U.S. government that was ready for a shift from democracy to tyranny and actually wanted that. And we can see right now on this knife edge, is the Supreme Court going to just protect due process? Even if they do protect due process, what's the enforcement mechanism if the executive branch has all the different enforcement mechanisms, U.S. Marshals, Federal, Bureau of Intelligence, military, and so on. So, it's just this right now. But that also all has consequences in terms of the value of the dollar, the stock market. So that's kind of like the knife edge of a situation we're in right now. And obviously, the best thing would be for Trump to be impeached, for him to be unable to finish out his term, and for this to go, into a different direction. But at the moment, obviously, the Republican, Congress is unable to act for various reasons. I mean, a lot of them are ideologically subservient to Trumpism. Some of them also are getting death threats to their families and so on, and are very worried about, if they turn against Trump, are they going to end up in a ditch somewhere? So we're in like a really very dangerous, very bad situation. And personally, as somebody who wrote a lot about the climate emergency, like this, we were already missing the boat, when it came to really dealing with the environment of the planet in a, logical and cohesive way, for the benefit of our descendants. And now this is setting back all of the environmental progress. I mean, they're obviously closing down the agencies that monitor the weather and the climate. They're it's basically it's like, so on the one hand we have, that's where we're at, like, and unfortunately even now at this point, where you think would be stunningly obvious to the people of America that this is a travesty, I think it's something like 45%, 43%. I think it's out of 43% of the populace is still supporting Trump, according to polls. If that goes down another 10%, then the country really potentially becomes ungovernable. And then we'll really see something, maybe that we haven't seen before. So that's kind of like my analysis. I mean, my past work, my first book, Breaking Open the Head, was on psychedelic shamanism. I wrote a book called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, that was looking at this time as the fulfillment of various prophecies from indigenous cultures, like the Hopi, talking about in Arizona, talking about a shift between the fourth world and the fifth world. Yeah, I was really looking forward to an awakening, a planetary evolution of consciousness. Maybe that will still happen, but now we have to get there. We're going to have to overcome pretty tremendous obstacles, because the amount of wealth that's now amassed in this control system is just tremendous. And so, for instance, back in like 2016, 18, blue and red media was pretty balanced. Like you had progressive or just, objective media. Now the sort of quote unquote red media, has a much bigger reach, and they're just amassing more and more power and control. TikTok very likely will be sold to a Trump kind of ally, which will just mean that they have even more unfettered access to the mindscape of young people. And then, sorry, I'm almost going over my time. I didn't think I had much to say, but then another whole issue is artificial intelligence. Many reputable people in the AI world are saying that it's like, that we might have what's called artificial general intelligence in 2 to 3 years. And we don't really know the impacts that will have on society, but essentially you'll have, these artificial intelligent systems that are able to work 24 hours a day at incredibly high speed and do anything that a human can do in front of a computer as well or better than any human. So I think that is also another thing, why the tech billionaires felt this was their moment to take over the government in this sense, is they're aware that this artificial intelligence evolution could go in many, many directions. So, for instance, you could use artificial intelligence, and now they have something called vibe coding, where people can build systems or programs or apps without needing to know programming languages and so on. So things that took months can be done in days, or years can be done in days. So that could be used to liberate humanity and create a sort of democratic infrastructure for transformation. So if you look at somebody like Audrey Tang, who was the digital minister of Taiwan, she created a whole digital infrastructure for Taiwanese democracy to make it more resilient and responsive. And she shifted their trust in the government became much, much higher, went up like 70, 80%. People now feel that they're able to kind of speak with, communicate, respond, get responses from their government pretty much instantaneously. And those are the type of systems that could be instituted all around the world. We could have a much more participatory or direct democracy through these same tools that at the moment look like they're about to be used to oppress and surveil and control us to a level that we've never imagined. So that's my shtick for today. Thanks for listening.
Whoops, Pedro, we can't hear you. Your microphone's not working.
My micro is here.
There you
Many
go.
thanks, Daniel. Maybe according to our rudimentary methodology, it is time for Howard to respond, and then we will have some. But I think in the announcement of this conference, that in the press release that Howard made, he was saying in the 25 years in which Bloom and Pinchbeck have known each other, the two have seldom agreed on anything. But that's what has made their debate so electrifying and so fruitful. I think this thing, You have completely broken your establishment.
Absolutely. We've broken our record, Daniel. We're agreeing for the most part on just about everything tonight. But there are a couple of things I wanted to point out. First of all, I thought that your presentation was fucking brilliant. Sorry for the language. I got carried away. But, first of all, there's an military alliance in the world. On the radio show that I do every week, I've been calling it for the last 4 or 5 years, the Axis of Evil. And it includes Russia, North Korea, Iran. It did include Syria until the new regime in Syria. It includes Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And what Donald Trump really wants to do is move us out of the free world and into the axis of evil. Why? Because of his sheer hero worship of Vladimir Putin, and because he has been a Slavophile for almost 50 years. So that's one element of the backdrop to keep your eye on. There's a principle in chickens. Generally, if you go to visit a farm and you look at the yard where the chickens are kept, you will see peace, tremendous peace. But that peace is a product of a dominance hierarchy. And that dominance hierarchy, who's number one, who's number two, who's number three, has been worked out long before you ever saw that chicken yard. If you drop a new chicken into that chicken yard, all hell breaks loose. Because every chicken in that yard wants to make sure that it's not driven down the social ladder in order to make room for the chickens on top. And right now, the equivalent of throwing a new chicken into the yard is happening because the United States is pulling out of the global hierarchy of nations. It's pulling out of the top spot. And the top spot is open for grabs. And that's one reason all of this could lead to another world war. A second element is, how did Donald Trump win the election? According to The Economist 6 months ago, America had an economy that was the envy of the world. It was growing faster than any other world economy. Today, America's economy is being shattered and destroyed by the tariff situation, by Trump's Liberation Day. And that, again, leaves an open spot in the pecking order. Let me look at my notes here for a second. So how did Trump manage to pull his recent win off? The parrot principle. Repeat a fact over and over and over. Let's not say fact. Repeat an idea over and over and over and over again. And by the 15th time you've pronounced that idea, it becomes reality. So Donald Trump repeated over and over and over again, and his minions, that America had the worst economy in history, when in fact it had the best in history. And because Americans listen to what they're told, we all do, once you said it the 15th time, it became true. And anybody you talk to in the Republican Party today believes that the economy was a wreck, a disaster under Joe Biden. In fact, the opposite was true, the very opposite. But Americans do not sit around the way Daniel and I do, analyze these things day after day after day. They listen to what they are told by he who makes the most noise in the media. And who makes the most noise in the media? Donald Trump has been working on his personal publicity since 1978. And by the 1990s, he'd already worked his way up to the point where his name became a joke. Well, why is that important? Because a name that can become a joke is a name that everybody knows. And that was just one stage on his launch platform. He's driven, of course, not by a long-term goal. He's driven by personal vanity. He's driven by a greed for praise and attention. Nonetheless, he's been in the public eye longer than any other personality in politics by a long shot. So he has the platform. He makes headlines when he speaks. He has the platform to repeat something over and over and over and over again until it becomes the new reality in the minds of the people who are following him. The Project 2025, I run several space groups, 3 space groups to be specific, with pretty high level people. One has a former governor, a 3-star general, a former head of the House Science Committee. One of my good friends in one of these groups is a Republican. He is an extremely intelligent man. He used to be the controller, the guy who gave you the narrative on the space shuttle missions. He believes that Project 2025 is a fantasy cooked up by those monstrous Democrats in an effort to pillory poor Donald Trump. He believes that to this very day. We had this discussion, we had this argument on Monday, that recently. Donald Trump has got the people who are following his view of the world completely flummoxed. He's placed them in an alternative reality. He's about to go further in placing it as the only reality, because the major television stations, ABC, NBC, CBS, all hold a license from the government. And he has been hinting that he's going to yank those licenses because they are all committing libel against him. What does libel against him mean? It means telling the truth about him, because he is presenting an alternative reality. Project 2025 put together a 920-page document on how, on how the deep state should be overthrown, how the American government as we've known it should be overthrown. In the interest of, I'm not quite sure what, and Daniel, you probably got a better handle on this than I do, what the Heritage Society and Project 25 were after. But they're the ones who said that they want public servants in the United States to tremble in their socks, to tremble so badly that they live in fear all night long, and they wake up in a state of terror. That, I paraphrased it, but that is what Project 2025 has been after. And Project 2025 has wanted to take apart the entire federal government in order to turn power apparently over to the oligarchs, as you call them, Daniel. So my friend, who was the controller on the space shuttle, is convinced that this is a fantasy. It's not. It's a 920-page book. And the Project 2025 people started a very interesting aspect of their project about 3 years ago. They started looking for people who wanted to be part of a Trump government that would take apart the deep state. And they then screened the people who were eager to be a part of this project under Donald Trump to weed out the competent ones from the incompetent ones. Then they took the competent ones and they trained them to do a specific job within the Trump government, the government that would take apart the so-called deep state, the federal government, as we know it today. So by the time Trump came to power, they were ready to go, complete with all the personnel it would take to accomplish their purposes. And yet people deny that there's a Project 2025. Russ Vought, who was one of the primary architects of Project 2025, is working, he heads the Office of Management and Budget. Now, Donald Trump told us he knew nothing about Project 2025. If he knew nothing about Project 2025, why is Russ Vought the head of the Office of Management and Budget? Now, what these people were trying to achieve, it was pretty much what projects like older projects like Opus Dei were trying to achieve. Ultimately, they were, so far as I can see, they were trying to achieve a dictatorial government, run, of course, by one of them. And that one of them, a convenient puppet, is Donald Trump. So, Daniel, what do you see? What was the goal of Project 2025? Why did they want to get rid of 2 million government workers and replace them with people who would praise Trump's every breath?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is a very long effort. A great book is by Jane Mayer, a New Yorker writer, where she wrote a book called Dark Money, and she goes back to six and the Mercers and so on. And now basically, at a certain point, they saw that there was more public education, people were becoming more educated. There was more that led to, and they were becoming more affluent. The lower classes, the working classes, the middle class. That was leading to these movements of social justice, secular, all of that. They were, kind of rock rib Christian libertarians, and so they had billions of dollars from oil money. So they do that. Not something that could just be done in a few years, that it was going to be a multi-decade long project. And so they architected it out like a corporate takeover that's going to take a long time. And they brought a group together of fellow-minded, and then they were going to have to do trial and error. So they were like, okay, if we want to, deliberalize society and move it into this sort of like a libertarian, kind of broken system where you have like a few, poor people, and then you have like these few oligarchs controlling everything. What is that going to take? And they were like, okay, well, we have to build versions of the grassroots social movements that are on the, so they created what's called astroturfed movements that look like grassroots movements, like the Tea Party. The same way the left has academic departments that spread their ideas and magazines and think tanks. We need a whole infrastructure like that. So we create the Heritage Foundation. We buy the economics department at the University of Chicago for Milton Friedman. We pay for people like Charles Murray, who wrote The Bell Curve, which argues that there's genetic differential in intelligence, so it really doesn't make sense to create social services and public education for minorities, like Black people in particular, because they're never going to, type of benefit for society or in a tribe. They tried different things, fail, and then at the same time, America did have an organic left, as you see in European, countries around Europe. But unfortunately, because we were the sort of, ultimately very right-wing empire, even if we had countercultural trappings, our intelligence agencies decimated the organic left that was trying to develop in the U.S. So we did that through assassinations, like we assassinated Freddie Hampton, who's one of the leaders of the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We also had a lot of the intelligence agencies went after movement leaders with legal campaigns, whether it was like Timothy Leary or whoever else. If you would catch them on a drug charge or even invent a drug charge, then that whole leftist movement would have to spend a huge amount of money defending that person. It would lose its energy. It would all just go into that. And then there were, murders, like shooting the nonviolent protesters at Kent State and so on. So a strong message was sent to the populace, and there was enough largesse in the society, enough wealth and enough money that it was like, okay, you can either beat your head against the wall and do this leftist thing, and we're going to punish you, or you can, go into Rolling Stone magazine and, create like psychedelic ads for like Nike and Coca-Cola. Tom Frank covered this very well in The Culture of Cool. So we created this, the counterculture, moving into the mainstream, but the underlying substrate of America, we were this empire that was seeking to control the world. And if we didn't like it, if we didn't like a socialist in Chile, we would go and we would formulate a coup against that person and destroy that innovation and so on, as we did with Allende. Or we would start a war for resources like the Iraq War, which, the Project for New American Century, that was, some of Bush's guys were like, okay, ultimately we need to access the strategic oil reserves of the Middle East. And to do that, we need a 9/11. We need a Pearl Harbor style inciting incidents. The 9/11 happened. That gave them their opportunity to go and try to didn't work out very well in the end. But so we've been acting like this, empire acting with impunity, with this sort of liberal counterculture overlay that you see in Hollywood and rock music and so on. So now that's heritage culture. It's interesting now. Actually, apparently the Koch brother who's left and the Mercers, they're actually struggling a little bit with the tech oligarchs who have got almost too extreme for them. Anyway, there's some tensions there, and that's one thing. If we're going to talk not just about how we got into the situation, but strategies to get out of it, is exacerbating the tensions that exist between the MAGA base, who have an America First belief, and the tech oligarchs, who have absolutely no real patriotism whatsoever and see kind of the American people as shit to grow money on. That's the kind of fracture, that could be exploited if we wanted to get out of just, feeling bemoaning how bad the situation is, because it's extremely bad, and then get into a tactical and strategic action plan about what to do. You do have a lot of Christians, you have a lot of fundamentalists. You and I are living in New York City. We didn't move to the deep South to try to help these poor people, at one point I tried to create an infrastructure of local community groups to share transformational ideas, and, whether from permaculture to shamanism to, ecstatic dance and so on, but to being aware that there needed to be a new cultural movement in the U.S. that actually, reached out to poorer people, because I was part of the sort of Burning Man culture and so on. But yeah, we couldn't get funding for that; it was impossible. And basically, it's much easier for the right wing to get funding for their thing, because if you're simply trying to make more money, everyone gets it. That's straightforward. If you're trying to equalize power, if you're trying to restore democracy, if you're trying to create healthy ecosystems, there's no money in that. There just ain't. The money is in exploit. So in a way, I think what we can see now happening is actually the ultimate kind of summation statement of Christian dominant white imperialism, capitalist exploitation. In a way, what we're now seeing is kind of the apotheosis of all of these trends. And this desire to take us all the way back. Even Peter Thiel has said that he doesn't think women should have the right to vote. Now with the SAVE Act, they're trying to disenfranchise 65 million women voters who changed their names when they got married, saying you have to have your same name as prove that you had the same name as your original birth certificate or whatever. They would bring back slavery if they could. There's no doubt about it. They want to go all the way back to the pre-Civil War. There's no limit here. It's not clear how we stop them unless there really was a mass civil society movement, general strikes, exploiting the rifts in the movement, kind of a rapid media propaganda communication strategy. Liberals have tended to be focused on the coastal elites, the managerial class. They completely ignored the working class. They fucked the working class, basically. Obama didn't do shit for the working class. None of these guys did. Raising the minimum wage, so obvious. Taxing the wealthy a bit, so obvious. This succession of choices has led us to this cul-de-sac as a society. And now I don't know if we survive this, to be honest. It may actually just be a techno hell, for the next, many decades. There will be a power gulf when Trump himself passes away, because in these types of autocratic movements, when you have a figure like that, they constellate so much magnetic energy around themselves that sometimes the movement can't sustain itself after that. I think the average dictatorship lasts 7 years, but that's because some of them last short time and some of them go on for decades. If Trump can actually find a successor who has charisma, then we're really even in deeper shit. But what we have to do is get out of navel gazing. We have to get out of feeling bad about the situation, or even we have to get the analysis clear in our heads as what's going on, why it's happening, the impact that Russia had, and then we would have to move into action strategy mode. How do we use social media? How do we create a multidimensional media and propaganda campaign to bring back? If we could get 15 to 20% of the MAGA voters sane again, that could be enough to break the logjam. If there's fault lines in the military who all swear oath to the Constitution, not to an autocrat, that's another fault line. If they're able to, pollute, toxify the military and take them away from their oath in the Constitution, that's a very dangerous situation. I mean, luckily there is an element where they're kind of like buffoons, where they overreach a lot, but they unfortunately also have tremendous power on their side right now. I mean, just today, the FBI arrested a judge in Minnesota who was, kind of like warning these illegal immigrants not to go out the front door of the courthouse after their hearing because ICE was waiting there to pounce on them and illegally arrest them and carry them away. So she said, guys, take the side door, because they're going to do this illegal jumping of you. And so the FBI used that as a rationale to arrest her. So she's now in federal prison. And that sends a chilling message, obviously, to judges across the country. So it's really that, like, they're not going to stop at anything. They have all the military force. They have all the technology, all the surveillance. It's just a bad situation, frankly, unless there was some really collective mass movement. Personally, I'm looking at getting a visa to get out of this country, like maybe move to Portugal. I'm waiting day by day to see if there is enough of a pushback in this society. Like if the people can band together, if we can figure out, it's great that Harvard is resisting. You have to think that's not just that institution, but the, hundreds of thousands of, elites who've gone through that institution, who, are pushing back against this thing, but we see that Trump is a bully, and bullies will fold pretty quickly if there's a strong pushback, and in some areas he is folding, but there's no doubt that they're going to keep trying to institute this autocratic control. So we have to get a lot more creative and a lot quicker and a lot more responsive if we don't want to just be, kind of totally wiped out by it.
Well, let me tell you where I think things are going next. Trump has declared that the real enemies of the United States are not Russia and China. The real enemies of the United States are the vermin within, the enemies within. By the enemies within, Trump means anyone who doesn't agree with him, anybody who criticizes him. The taking 220 immigrants, accusing them of being members of a Venezuelan gang and deporting them from the United States is a trial run. It is a trial run for deporting or incarcerating you and me, any of us who dare disagree with him. So as bad as the crimes against the Constitution have been in the first 98 days of the Trump presidency, this is only a preview, and things are going to get worse. And as you pointed out, Daniel, the courts are impotent, and they're impotent because they may well come down on something that Trump has done. They may well accuse the Republicans of violating the orders of the court, but their only mechanism of enforcement is the Justice Department. And the Justice Department has been turned into a part of Trump's personal army. So there is no way they're going to enforce any judgments against any member of the Trump administration. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Pedro. Whoops, your microphone.
Yes, thank you very much to both of you. I think that your exchange is really great. The only thing I don't see sufficient sparks, because you have been so coincident.
Cohesive.
So I will bring a little bit of discrepancy. My opinion is that remembering McLuhan, the new media, the new social media, the social networks have made a new social psychology of the masses. And then I think that the Democrats went into this social psychology to promote new identities, separate identities of many kinds. But this was felt also, I have also the case of Spain, but it was felt as a sort of disgregation of the nation. And there was nasty things like the woke ideology promoted officially and very intrusive. And many of the sustainable development goals that are offered as a religious dogma in very absurd ways. And then this was negative, let's say, for 60% of the population, these excesses, bureaucratic and ideological excesses, and particularly the disaggregation of the social psychology of the nation. And this was well used by the Republicans, the Trumpians, etc. But then I think that an important asset to be recuperated by the opposition to Trump is, he was promoting the slogan, the Make America Great Again, the unification of the nation. And this was the way that in Europe we were looking at the victory of the Republicans. Then it was, all you are saying that it is quite right. But then I think that from the American liberals and the American Democrats should be a reunification of the nation. Also, abandoning the politics of identities, abandoning the woke ideology, abandoning the dogmas of sustainable development, stupidities, and many other things that are not, many people cannot swallow these sort of things. I am in Spain living exactly in the other side of the mirror. We have a leftist, communist, and socialist government who is trying to get an autocratic power on society. And we are like all the exaggeration of this wake ideology, identities, ideology, etc. We are living it. We are living them in our ordinary lives. I mean, the way you have to manage the pets, the ways you have to manage the social relations in companies. I mean, they are intruding into many aspects of life with very unswallowable policies, inspired by the work and all that. Also in the teaching system, education. And then I think that I don't know, maybe some self-criticism or some really attractive unitary view for society. I find this was missing in the Democrat campaign, and it is still missing in my view, and thinking maybe from the other side of the mirror, this Spain.
Well,
I think that's very, I totally agree with you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, clearly there was a lot of overstepping. This guy, C.J. Hopkins, talks about the problem with the sort of liberal, kind of secular ideology is that it leads to a decoding of all values. So it sort of strips everything down. So there's not because there's no religion, there's no morals, there's no inherent morality, there's no inherent gender and so on. And ultimately that's intolerable for many people, as we've now seen. And I agree with you. I actually spent 10 years writing a book, How Soon Is Now? That was an effort to envision kind of like an orientation towards a kind of different future, based on ideas from Hannah Arendt and Murray Bookchin and Buckminster Fuller and many other people. And I still think the book is relevant. I mean, I think even religion is a big thing. We're seeing a revival of Christianity right now. Obviously the Pope's death, 10 minutes after meeting J.D. Vance, that was very peculiar and very symbolic, if you believe there's a symbolic level to world events. What I've argued in my work is there is the potential for a unification of science and spirituality, or science and mysticism, through a philosophy called monistic or analytic idealism. The leading proponent of that philosophy is Bernardo Kastrup. He's a Dutch philosopher. He's written a number of books, including Why Materialism is Baloney and Dreamed Up Reality. There's also Donald Hoffman. Neil Ties's Notes on Complexity is another sort of work in this idealist philosophy, as is Amika Swami's books, including Physics of the Soul and the Self-Aware Universe. And basically, all of these scientists and thinkers are arguing that in a very logical way, it makes much more sense to think of consciousness as the fundamental or the underlying reality, rather than the material and the physical being the baseline reality. So it's a paradigm shift from materialism to idealism. This idea that consciousness is actually the foundational level of reality, and it allows more space for integration of science and mysticism. So we've seen with quantum physics, we've seen the Nobel Prize of Physics 2022 went to the discovery that the universe is not locally real. So essentially, it's up to the participant or the observer to kind of like bring the kind of energetic flux and pattern of the universe into coherence, into a sort of transitory yet sedimented form. And so Amika Swami was an Indian physicist who wrote about quantum mechanics and so on. He writes these books where he looks at how this idealism conception, which is actually, I think, more logical and more sensible in many ways from physicalism or materialism, then allows us to think about, could there be aspects of our being that, reincarnate, or, could there be subtle bodies? Could there be other levels or dimensions of reality? So that kind of investigation, I think, could also reposition the traditional faiths like Christianity and Islam and Judaism in a kind of bigger metastructure that makes them not irrational but archetypal. Like there are different expressions or efforts to kind of fathom this archetypal reality that underlies things, and they're not, because I think there's been a dichotomy between physicalists and materialists who just say, oh, God is a delusion, the God delusion, the God gene, it's some weird kind of like phony trope of the human personality or something. So I think that for me is one of the, and it's unfortunately it's still a very intellectual and abstract idea. That for me is like one of the only ways to build a bridge, because the traditional left tends to be very materialist, going back to Marx, who was an arch materialist, and without a kind of a way to access a more transcendent dimension of reality, the left is a little bit stuck. And and you see that in Jordan Peterson and all these thinkers who've become Kevin Roberts, who's the head of Heritage Foundation. They're holding God and this sort of Christendom kind of ideology, as a thing that they're using to support this very anti-humane political ideology, where there's the natural caste system, where the whites are meant to be, this, and the blacks are meant to be that, and so on. Another big issue, and why, I feel that this right-wing thing went over the top in the last few years, also has a lot to do with gender dynamics, right? Because actually, women in Western societies were gaining a lot of power, and so, for instance, I think it's like 60 or 70% college graduates in America have been women over the last years, and women have been equalizing in kind of entrepreneurial positions and building companies and working corporations and so on. So that rising up of the power of the feminine has been very, very terrifying for men. And we've seen like this incel movement in the US where a lot of men are giving up on intimate relationships. They don't feel that they can, they're not alpha males, they can't get the highly prized female, so they're turning that energy and that frustration inward. They're becoming angry, they're becoming destructive, they're shooting up schools, they're buying guns. But that whole energy, like Andrew Tate, the whole manosphere, this whole thing around the sort of males who've lost their natural role, because in a relatively peaceful
Daniel,
what's that?
This should be a little bit more agile, because this is the final colloquium.
Yeah, I'll let
more agile. So, Howard, do you want to say something, and we start a round of questions?
No, I think that Daniel's done a very good job of summing this up.
Okay. Questions from the audience? we can disagree with them. They make a very strong couple. um, okay, I think most of our audience is inclined to scientific points of view. What you were arguing about the new science in these times, Daniel, is part of the debates we have in the International Academy of Information Studies. But I think for us is not something we were willing to discuss today, because we were willing to hear to opinion leaders of the states just to check what's happening now. The state is at the crossroads, and many other countries also. Okay, and here
Bill
we have
Benson has a question.
Bill Benson, please. Open, make your cue.
Well, Bill, we don't have a sound on you.
Do you now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to make a statement. I mean, Howard knows me very well. He made it possible for me to write a book about music, which runs from the brain up through the origins of music, through cultural evolution of music. Long before I knew Howard, I studied with a man named David Hayes, who was founder of the discipline of computational linguistics. I know what's going on in the computer world these days. While I was talking with Howard, I was talking to someone who was an expert in complex neurodynamics. These days, I'm working with a brilliant scientist named Ramesh Viswanathan, who is in Germany, who's an expert in machine vision, and we're figuring out what's going on inside these large language models. Because the thing is, no one knows. Our brilliant technologists have created.
Wait a minute. Hang on a second. There we go.
These brilliant technologists have created the technology, but they don't know how it works. So my line is sort of like this. Imagine you're in the 19th century and you were asked to invest in a whaling voyage. You found out that the captain and crew are experts in the ship. They can do things with their ship that no one can do with any ship. But they've never been around the Cape Horn. They've never sailed in the South Pacific. They don't know a damn thing about whales. Now, what are their chances of having a successful voyage? They'll have a wonderful sail. But whales, that's where we are in AI. I mean, you've got brilliant people, lots of money, burning it up on technology that really is amazing, but they don't know where it's going. And I mean, Daniel, you talk about this union of idealism and a regrounding of philosophy. That's absolutely necessary if we're going to understand this technology. And I think the technology, I mean, I want to switch from a view of Homo economicus, where economics rules life, to Homo ludens, play. Eric.
Oh, he froze. He was on a good riff.
Whoops, I think you. Yeah.
I mean, Howard's book is all about how the universe thumbs its nose at lack of creativity and lack of imagination. It keeps inventing new things that shouldn't happen, but they happen all the time.
And I want to suggest something else. First of all, the book provides a ground for a new meeting point between religion and science, because it talks about life as being obstreperous. It talks about life as being outrageous. It points to life as being rebellious. The idea we're being sold of a harmonious universe simply isn't true. This cosmos abhors an equilibrium. It's constantly churning forth new things. And Pedro has pointed to the extremes of the left and becoming autocratic. And Daniel, you and I have pointed to the extremes of the right and become autocratic. But a concept from the new book is that opposites are joined at the hip. They're different facets of the same thing. Like the left end and the right end of your curtain bar point in opposite directions, but actually they're both part of the same system. They're part of the curtain rod. And to achieve what you're talking about, Daniel, we have to take the best elements from the right and the best elements from the left and find a fusion, an amalgam, something that leaps beyond the level on which those two things exist. We have to be obstreperous, but we also have to find a leader who has that kind of instant name recognition, instant headline value that Donald Trump had for the right. And that's my final word for the night.
Okay, I don't think that it is your final word for today. I'm sure. I'm not personally. I am not at all optimistic about this union of the sciences, of knowledge, of religion, of mysticism. Absolutely no, because this is we are living, I think, 30 years of New Age. This is a new version of New Age, and it has led, in my opinion, almost to nowhere. I mean, we have several fundamental problems in the sciences, and we have a deep incongruity in between natural sciences and human knowledge, humanities, psychology, and social sciences in general. And it has not been solved. In many international Academy of Information Studies believe that there is a deep misconception of information, and information is the bread and butter of our social complexity. The information flows that surround our individual lives are managed with us in science and in technology with primitivism. I mean, like using dynamite with hammers and I mean, the disgrace of social psychology of the masses is also due to the lack of scientific illumination, so to speak.
Well, there's another problem, and that is that in a discipline that is supposed to be objective, science, we've allowed something to take over our point of view. In becoming involved in environmentalism, which is important, in climate change, which is also important, we've allowed a chronic apocalypticism to step in. We view the world, we are destroying the planet. Our destruction of the planet will lead to the destruction, annihilation of humanity. That is a default position in science that is not recognized as a hypothesis. And anything that isn't a hypothesis in science isn't science. Science is about generating hypotheses and challenging them. The new book, The Case of the Sexual Cosmos, Everything You Know About Nature is Wrong, has a profound optimism as opposed to the profound pessimism of the science of the moment. And that is extremely important because you go where you look. If you are looking down, you go down. If you are looking up, you can go up. And we need to start looking up in science again. There have been so many massive global shifts or climate shifts in the history of this planet that it is absolutely ridiculous. This planet is the home of climate catastrophe. And things have gotten so warm that 55 million years ago, there were tropical animals and plants living at the South Pole. The South Pole wasn't located exactly where it is now, but it's a region that also can be covered with ice, and was covered with ice because of another massive climate change. So massive climate change is the next ice age, or the next really massive global warming, where the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are at least 10 times what they are today. It's always just around the corner. That's the way that nature has arranged things. That's one of the intrinsic qualities of this planet. Life has been around for 4 billion years because it has overcome catastrophe, because it has been a catastrophe tamer and has taken advantage of catastrophe and harnessed it. And that's our job. We've got to reinsert the optimism into science, even to allow ourselves to remove carbon from the atmosphere so that we can stabilize the climate of the planet. And in fact, what we need to do is regard that extraction of carbon from the atmosphere as a step towards something new, climate stabilization technologies. And we've been using climate stabilization technologies since we created the first tent 17,000 years ago, or the first fur coat 300,000 years ago. It's time to take that a step beyond where it is now. But humans are hell creators and paradise makers. And it is time for us to go back to the job of making the paradises that we foresee and not allowing ourselves to sabotage ourselves with a view that apocalypse is not only imminent, it's inevitable. And it's our fault.
So again, Howard, again, this is your final word. You won't tell anything else.
Yes.
Yeah, because I am going to provoke you again, because I see that in order to enlist masses of population into a common goal on planet or better social organization, we have from the sciences, we have to provide clearer ideas to the people involved in these tasks. I mean, politicians, media, analysts, and I think my opinion is that there is not yet a parallel of the McLuhan of the networks. Maybe it is very naive what I am saying, but I have realized there is a change of psychology because people have an information regime quite different. Young people have got in so many troubles because they feed for many hours on messages that are very exciting, that make them very nervous. And even adults, what they receive is not calm, reflective thought from journalists, from books, but receive all that cold room of X, of Instagram, of Telegram, of whatever. And so a better understanding of all that with, and in my opinion, there is, maybe I am wrong, but there is a very serious disconnection of the different approaches to biological information to the personal information we receive in our lives. And it is very similar. What the living cell experiments is very similar to what I do experiment on my life with information flows. And this is so fundamental, but so misunderstood. So much misunderstood.
Well, people see things through the perceptual lens that has been given to them, just the way that science now sees things through the perceptual lens of apocalypse, inevitable apocalypse, and humans being the evil force on this planet. And we've got to find a perceptual lens through which our kids can see all of that intake they're taking in, which, believe me, is making them smarter, in a way that is constructive. Right now, we're telling them that this is a personal apocalypse, all of this involvement in social media. No, it's not. It connects you to other human beings. No.
It disconnects you from the important social relationships you should maintain with your family, with your friends. You need time to socialize face to face with your, what I call the sociotype. And people are disconnected in an abstract way. They don't have the natural reads and flows of information. It's like eating continuously, with sugar and all this junk food, but continuously. That the mental health. The parallel is there. We are building a worse world with the new media.
Well, I ran.
In the time being, they are not culturally dominated yet or purified yet by that interesting culture. We don't have that culture.
Well, in a deep and time that's very different than ours, a time way back in history, 10 years ago, I was sitting at a dinner table with two guys in their early 30s sitting across from me. And one said that when he was 3 years old, his son had taken the iPad and taken the cell phone and had taken a deep dive into submarines. He was fascinated by submarines. And by the time he was 5 years old and went into first grade, he had a BA, the equivalent of a BA in submarines. He was an expert in submarines because he'd been following his curiosities out across these vast channels of information that were unavailable to us in the past. And the other guy's son said, yeah, my son did that too, but with dinosaurs. Kids have a natural curiosity, and the internet has given them the tools with which to dive as deep into their curiosities as they want. Now, I haven't been in touch with parents with kids that age since 10 years ago. So I don't know what's happening today, and everything is changing so fast that the media landscape today is very different than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But for motivated kids, especially if they're given a positive lens on how they can use the internet to follow their curiosities, give them that mirror lens, and they are more likely to do what these two kids.
Oh, Howard, let them play with other kids. With the less possible technology, they will mature, they will socialize, they will make interesting links that will give meaning to their lives, not this techno junk.
Right.
Okay.
I've got to run off in a minute, and
okay, Daniel, do you want to say the final word? And we close. Because Howard asked 3 times the final word.
I was going to weigh in on this whole. Yeah, I was going to weigh in on this whole question of you can say like a friend wrote a book on cognitive capitalism, and we can look at how and of course I agree with Howard that the internet can drive curiosity, and if you have a trained mind, like right now AI is incredible because you can do incredible research if you know what you're interested in and so on. But I do think it's having a lot of negative impacts on a whole. And so I kind of agree with Pedro's perspective. So, so for instance, capitalism works and always trying to define new markets. And, we've sort of created markets around the world now. So we have, so basically the new markets are often in the psyche, right? So for instance, GPS, Google Maps, takes a function that was natural to humans, which was getting around, navigating spatially, and outsources it to a digital network. So if you're, normally the hippocampus, which is where spatial navigation develops, is something that develops between the ages of like 9 and 16. And then you're supposed to get lost in the forest with your friends and have to find your way back and get lost in the village. And you develop the ability to navigate by smell and sight and touch and so on. Kids are not doing that anymore if they're having a GPS on their phone from the age of like 8 or 9. So the hippocampus and those kids may never get full. And so, they've traded a natural organic function for a kind of a virtual digital relationship. Of course, then Google could decide it's going to charge $50 a month on Google Maps. What are those kids going to do? And I would say I know 20. My daughter, as they suffer from this, and other kids where they really have lost some of their ability just to navigate spatially because of this. And now with ChatGPT and AI. Even a reasoning. So I think there's a lot of dangers. And yes, I agree with Howard that it can be really amazing for human curiosity and human development. But unless people are really given like very intense media literacy and really, given, again, I mean, the phone should be off, for kids half the time. It shouldn't be an all the time thing. But the addictive power of these things, they're like cigarettes for the psyche. Like everyone just grabs for them. So anyway, yeah, we have a lot of issues right now, and I appreciate this time to share with you guys. Howard, it was great to see you again. Let's. time. Everybody else, you can follow me in my Substack, danielpinchbeck.substack.com. If you write to me, my email, which Pedro has, I'll give you for a bit. I appreciate you guys are holding these conversations, and yeah, I hope we get through this little Trumpian cul-de-sac.
Daniel, maybe, excuse me, we could invite you to an electronic discussion list that this community organizes.
Sure.
You could be invited to make a presentation by email discussion list.
Sounds great.
Some future. Okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, everybody, thank you so much.
And you'll have a good night.
Nice to meet you, Pedro and Gordana and Kare and Bill. If I can see, have a great chat.
And I just want to thank Gordana, because your postings on the Foundations of Information Science list are so clear, so wonderfully written. Many of our discussions are one person saying something utterly incomprehensible and another person trying to one-up him by saying something even more incomprehensible. And you write in clear English with good ideas, and that's what really counts, not how much you can fling about the incomprehensible. Whoops, we can't hear you.
Okay.
No, still can't hear you.
Thank you so much. Coming from you, it means a lot. Your writing is also very clear, very precise, very to the point. I'm sorry that we didn't have possibility to discuss your new book in more detail. I'm very much interested in that discussion.
Right.
As well.
So that discussion will have to wait for another time. Pedro, if you ever want to have a discussion of my book, let's do that. But I really welcomed this. I got involved in writing geopolitical commentaries at the age of 16. At the age of 19, I tried to penetrate the John Birch Society and did it. But the two other kids who were in it with me dropped out the minute they saw that we were being offered a meeting with the head of the John Birch Society. So I've been, and that was the ultimate right-wing group in the United States back then. Project 2025 is its grandchild. So getting this opportunity to discuss where the world is right now that Pedro offered was invaluable to me.
Okay. Okay, Howard, many thanks. I think we will close now. And it's a good idea that we can, one of these weeks or months, we can discuss your new book. It could be maybe a different format, but it is a good idea. And many thanks to the audience. You will find in the YouTube channel of the Academy, of the IAIS Academy, on our YouTube channel, you will find the record of this session. Okay, Howard and colleagues, many greetings to all.
Thank you very much.
And have a great night. Thank you for your attention and feedback.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.